Hello and welcome everybody to the talk session on motion models and neural mechanisms. My name is Ralph Heffner, I'm the moderator for this afternoon. And the first talk is by Giuliani on the duration of occlusion effect is better explained by feed-forward and recurrent computations.
Thank you so much. So, welcome everyone. I'm Giuliana. I am a fourth-year PhD student at Ernest Strungman Institute for Neuroscience in Germany, and today I'm telling you a little bit about motion extrapolation. So throughout this conference, you might have heard at least a couple of times that we live in a very dynamic environment where things are constantly changed, and it's also true for science. It's so true that my title has changed since I submitted the abstract last year. So today, what I'm going to tell you actually is that duration of occlusion effect is better explained by recurrent than feed-forward and feedback computations. And to start, I would like to motivate it a little bit. Imagine you were sitting outside there, watching your friends playing volley. And then you see your friend throw the ball to the other side of the net, but before you can see the ball landing, somebody passes by with an umbrella. You can still estimate where and when this ball will land in the future moments. And this predictive ability involves encoding the ball's past trajectory, briefly storing and then extrapolating from this piece of information ahead in the future. In literature, it's often called motion extrapolation, and although we are quite good at motion extrapolation, our performance is heavily modulated by the passage of time. I would like to give you a more concrete example of this effect that I'm talking about. So I want you to observe this ball over here, and this ball is going to move towards this occluder, and it's going to run behind the occluder. What I want you to do is basically to clap whenever you think the ball touched the end of the occluder, okay? Ready for that? Don't wait for your friends. Clap as soon as you think the ball arrived. Great. Okay, let's do it again. But this time, I'm giving you a bit longer occluder. Ready? Go. Yeah, that's precisely what I'm talking about. So, so the duration of occlusion effect is this drop in precision in estimating the target location behind the occluder with the occlusion duration. And my question here is, how does it happen? So to address this question, we want to know first what are the mechanisms that are underlying this motion extrapolation. So first of all, we have several evidences that the visual system is involved in these predictive processes from early to late stages. So for example, a couple of electrophysiological studies recording activity from retinal ganglion cells during visual motion tasks revealed that retinal ganglion cells fire in anticipation to a moving stimulus about to enter, but not yet on the receptive fields. And those anticipatory responses seems to be a product of a feed-forward information process. Other studies, they show that representations of the expected location of a moving stimulus can be found in early visual cortex, but more interestingly is that some electrophysiological findings suggest that these representations could emerge from purely local recurrent activity without the need of a feedback signal incoming early visual cortex. And finally, which is very wide accepted in the field, is that different theories and models about how the brain might predict spatial temporal information proposes that higher level areas in the brain learn irregularities about the world and the environment, and then project these predictions back onto lower level areas, for example, the early visual cortex. And my main question in this talk is, how can this process account for behavioral effects in motion extrapolation? So one possibility is that without incoming sensory signal and no storage capacity, feed-forward mechanisms can only account for a small or very brief period of extrapolation. Recurrent mechanisms, on the other hand, could work as a buffer, storing information from the past trajectory and allowing the system to extrapolate from it. So we would expect that this recurrency supports longer range motion extrapolation. However, it's still restricted by its own limited capacity, storage capacity. So in other words, these dynamic irregularities from previous visual input may be forgotten over time, leading to the decay in precision. Yet another possibility is that the feedback mechanisms might be re-injecting signal into the visual system, supporting motion extrapolation for even longer periods of time. However, these feedback projections might also carry noise alongside and drop predictions over time. So our initial hypothesis is that the rate of decaying precision during motion extrapolation should differ between these three different mechanisms. More specifically, we would expect that motion extrapolation from purely feed-forward systems should show a steep decay in performance over time, followed by recurrent mechanisms which should help to support a more stable performance for longer periods of time. And finally, with feedback mechanisms, we could attenuate the precision decay even further ahead. So what are our goals here? So first, we wanted to model these mechanisms involved in motion extrapolation in an incremental manner. So we start with feed-forward, we add recurrency, and then we add feedback. And test how this motion extrapolation performance from these models decay over time. And finally, we also want to estimate how participants they are performing, doing this motion extrapolation over time. And finally, we want to compare which mechanisms can better explain the human behavior. So I will start with how we quantify motion extrapolation in humans. So we brought 21 participants to the psychophysics room, and they performed this task. So they see the target moving around the circular trajectory, and they are requested to track the target during the visible and occluded parts. And to make sure they are doing this, we presented these small shots, red blinks on the screen, and they have to do a 2FC task where they have to say if the shot falls ahead or behind the target. And we manipulate two variables here. So the first one was when this shot happened, and the other one was where this shot happened. And by manipulating these two variables, now we can measure the participants' precision in estimating the target location by looking at the error distribution around the target. So if I plot, for example, the error distribution here, we can use the standard deviation as a metric of precision, and we can use the mean of this distribution as a metric of bias. And what did we find? We replicate previous finding in the literature in which precision drops over time during occlusion, but we also find an overshooting bias. So right in the beginning of occlusion, participants, they tend to estimate the target being way ahead of where it really is, and then this overshooting bias drops over time. Okay, so we have quantified the behavioral effects, so now let's move to the models. So first, I would like to give you a glimpse on how these models, they were trained. So we had some data like this, some small videos, and all the models received as input 10 initial frames from this video. And then we asked the model to predict the very next frame in the sequence. So it outputs frame 11. Regarding the model architecture, we built 3 convolutional neural networks, so we are using UNet architectures here with the 3 encoding and decoding blocks inside the encoder and decoder, and with the following operations within each one of these blocks. In terms of how these models were different between them, so we used the feed-forward model where information is flowing purely in a feed-forward manner throughout the model from input to output. For the recurrent model, we add these LSTMs or recurrency in the bottleneck part. And in the feedback model, we yet add a feedback connection from the output layer to the input layer, and this feedback connection happens at every time step. We initially train all 3 of our models in a subset of moments in time dataset, which contains the several naturalistic videos. And then the models were further fine-tuned on a synthetic dataset with 600 different trajectories. So just to bring the models a bit closer to the real task that we want to test the models in. Okay, so then now we can test the model performance during motion extrapolation. How can we do that? So we are here using autoregression. So we give to the model the 10 ground truth input frames. The model predicts the next input frame. And then now we concatenate this prediction into the input, and we feed it again to the model. So then the model starts predicting on top of its own predictions. This way, we can estimate how the model internally accumulates noise over time. Okay, so now we finally test the model with the same task that participants did. So we give again the 10 inputs to the model. And here I'm plotting what the model should have predicted for the next 10 frames. This is how the feed-forward model predicts. This is how the recurrent model predicts. And this is how the feedback model predicts. So just a glimpse of some of the outputs. As metrics, so now we have to quantify how well these models are doing. So we decided to fit a 2D Gaussian for every predicted frame. And we are using the angular offset between the ground truth and the center of this Gaussian as a metric of bias, and the spreadness or the standard deviation as a metric of precision. What did we find? We find a decaying precision for recurrent and feedback models. And we find an overshooting bias, but in an opposite direction of what we found with participants. So they are increasing biases over time. Of course, we see increasing bias in the feed-forward model, but you can see there is a loss of signal throughout the predictions. Finally, we want to compare models now with humans, and for that, I'm fitting an exponential curve to these predictions, and then I'm looking at the decay rate. For the precision, the larger k indicates a steep decay in precision, and for the bias, a large k indicates a diminishing overshooting bias. And if we look how these models can explain the human data, we can see that feed-forward and feedback show a very distinct decay compared to humans, but a recurrent model can capture better this human decay over time. And finally, for the bias, we see that all three models are very much different from what humans are doing. So just to conclude, as a take-home message from our results, that the rate of decay in precision is better captured by recurrent computations, suggesting a capacity limit for maintaining dynamic information over time. The initial overshooting bias did not emerge from any of our models, which suggests that possibly it comes from different mechanisms, even outside the visual system, possibly more complex learned priors or modulation from the motor cortex. And finally, I would like to thank my lab and every one of you for listening, and also just to point out that these three amazing PhD students will be presenting their posters, so right after this session, make sure you check it out.
We have time for a couple of questions. Please.
Hi, Giuliana. That was really interesting. I was just wondering, looking at the errors from some of the models, it seems like a lot of the predictions are going off of the ring itself. Have you thought about constraining the model predictions to stay on the ring, just as some kind of like prior knowledge that the human observers might have had?
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. So this is a very preliminary data. There is a lot of things we would like to do with these models. So one of the things could be to have a sort of correction to make sure that the model always predicts within that aperture, yes.
Hi, great talk. So quick question about how you find the feedback versus recurrent. So in the brain, there are a couple of connections that are usually termed recurrent. One of them is lateral within a single layer, and another one is feedback, feed-forward kind of recurrency, right? And it seems like it's more the later maybe in your model. And a slightly second question is, in terms of the decay constant, where does that temporal decay in terms of the prediction come from in the model versus in the brain, considering the time delays of these connections or the time integration of these connections, etc.?
Okay, I respond to your first question first. So yes, so in the model we try to capture the two types of feedback. So the recurrency that I'm using here in the model, I'm trying to mimic this lateral connection, so within the same layer, within the same cortex. And then the feedback then would be from different layers. Your second question, I'm not sure I really grasp it.
Yeah, so the second question is the constant, the delay, right, the decay constant, temporal decay constant in terms of looking forward in prediction. How does that compare with the kind of decays that one will expect in the brain based on those sorts of connections, right, like biologically? Or is there any tie in there between those two, or is it really just how far away in the future are you trying to predict?
Yeah, I think these models doesn't really speak very close to that. But yeah, probably the feedback model is the one that could kind of get close to these neurotransmission delays. But yeah, it's not something that these models are capturing yet.